Man, you are one pathetic loser. No offense. No, none taken.
That is right, none taken. I am the Movie Moron, and this is the Movie Moron podcast, and we have a new episode, first time of the year, even though it is March. We've been a little bit of a break as we've been trying to figure some stuff out, but Dune Part 2 is out, and we said we will not miss Dune Part 2. And when I say we, I mean me and Trevor. Trevor has been hounding me saying there's no way I'm not going to be on the Dune 2 episode, and I agree. So I figured if we're going to come back, we'll come back now. So hopefully we'll get some stuff squared away, and then you can listen to us next week, next Monday. But yeah, we're going to do Dune Part 2 for you. With me is our old co-host, the part-time co-host, Trevor Landreth.
Taking on the role of resident party pooper today.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Yeah, if you see a glass, it's just Mountain Dew. Don't worry. And then we have from the What the Fanboy podcast, friend of ours, Brett Eitzen.
What's up, guys? Good to be back.
Did I say the last name correctly?
You sure did,
Okay,
Easton.
good.
Thank you.
I'm terrible with names, so I knew
No,
it
you
was
nailed it, my
probably
man.
wrong.
Usually you have to put a made-up middle name in for his name, like Brett Delanor Eitzen, but it's okay.
That's for your podcast, not mine. Which, yeah, you guys can say that at the top here, they have a MCU podcast called Reconstructing the MCU that comes out pretty much every other week, correct?
Yeah, I wish it was reconstructing. We're deconstructing.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
Hey, there's a little bit of reconstruction that happens from time to time.
Right.
Every
right.
so often we're like, oh, maybe this wasn't as horrible as we thought, but
Right. And if you want to check that out, that our next episode, our Black Widow episode, will be releasing 2 days after this episode.
Well, there you go. Yeah. So if you want to hear some Black Widow talk, go check that out. Or they've gone through every single MCU movie until Black Widow. So you can go back and listen to all of those. And they will continue to go through until there's no more Marvel movies, which AKA never. So
Or one of us just stops.
I was gonna say if one of us dies, but that's maybe that's too dark. Too dark for the MCU.
Yeah.
It's not dark enough for this podcast, though. So, Brett also has a podcast with two of his good friends called What the Fanboy. You can kind of see the memorabilia up in his video, where they do a weekly podcast that's more broad than both their two podcasts and mine, where they just talk about everything entertainment-wise, movies, TV show, video games. So go check that out. That's on Twitch and all the podcast platforms. But go hang out in the Twitch because it is fun.
It is fun.
We love
I make it fun.
talking
I'm gonna say
with
that it's,
with
I'm
people
gonna say
in chat.
It's me,
So
but, Baroque is also a classic in the
Yeah.
chat, and there's a few others. You know, come liven it up with us. We throw some jokes in there to try to get some airtime. But okay, I think that's it for formalities. Other than be checking out Twitter, Brett's movie company Twitter.
oh,
right?
yeah, keep an eye on Turkey Red Studios. Turkey
because
Red Studios.
They've got a new movie coming out soon, so
We do. Our first short film, so we're very excited about that.
yeah. So yeah, there's all of the plugs. And now we're gonna get straight into the episode, which like I said, we are doing the Dune.
Oh, he's
Part
He
two.
got the bucket.
Dune Part 2 is up.
Oh my
It is
gosh.
out and it is ready to be fucked. Let's go. So, yeah, we're going to go into general thoughts. So if you have not seen the movie yet, do not worry. We will not spoil anything for you. If you haven't read the book, doesn't matter. Haven't seen part one, we won't spoil anything. It'll just be general thoughts. And then we will come back after our not real break, but, you know, we'll take a little break and then we'll go into spoilers. So if you've seen it. So we'll kind of go around the circle, and as always, I'll be last. So... Trevor, why don't you start us off with your general thoughts? You are the person that read the book, so you can give us that background and give us your general thoughts.
Yeah, sure. Specifically for this podcast, yeah. The first part came out, and I was like, I want to read the book so that we have somebody that has read it for when this one comes out. And so I did, and I
bought the book and you read it.
That's right. Just like if you have read just like a small recommendation, I guess. If you have read the book, just like with any book you would ever read and then see the movie adaptation, you really need, not so much for part 1, but you really need to manage expectations for part 2. That being said, this is very well done, and I had a great time with it. The pacing was great. From start to finish, I was entertained. I had to go to the bathroom for a significant portion of it, but I held it in because I did not want to miss a thing. Like,
I thought you meant that you had to go to the bathroom for a significant portion, meaning that you had to take a deuce and you were gone for 20 minutes.
Oh, and I was gone.
Movie.
You just
No,
missed,
I was like,
a whole 20-minute section of the film. Oh my god!
You're like, I didn't fit the adaptation at all, but I missed 30 minutes of a 2-hour and 45-minute movie.
Well,
okay,
we were getting. I was trying to like, and as things, just like anything, as like stuff happens in the movie, if you know what's coming next, you can kind of like, even if you don't, you can kind of like pinpoint when like things are going to be slow before they ramp up again.
Sure.
And so like before the third act, I was like, okay, if I'm going to go, now is the time. And then like 2 seconds later, it was over. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm just stuck here. No, the only real problem I had with this, besides like the book stuff, which, like I said, take that or leave it, is I was pretty disappointed in Hans Zimmer's score. Yeah, this was like all of his new material in this just did not make it for me. I didn't find it interesting. The only thing I found interesting is one of the characters plays one of like the lute guitar instruments that's on this planet, and there's like a folk song that he sings that Hans Zimmer wrote. That's cool. I wanted more of that. But like, man, we got the Spider-Verse "What Up Danger" foghorn like a dozen times in this, and by the 4th time it happened, I was like, I'm done. I'm sick of this. Like, I would so much rather hear anything from the first movie. But that honestly, that was really the only thing, aside from like my personal opinion on like the book to film stuff, that really dragged it down for me. But no, I had a really great time with this.
Okay. Well, when spoilers come up, you can really dig into some of those book adaptation differences that made it.
And I won't get and like it's not a whole lot, but the stuff that is different is major.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, and that's it. Anytime you do any kind of adaptation, that's animated live action TV that we're dealing with right now with The Last Avatar.
I will say there is one thing that's in the book that really he does a really great job explaining visually, where they take time to explain it in the book and it's kind of a drag. We'll talk about that, but that was really, really cool the way he did it.
Okay.
Anyway. Yeah.
Nice. Cool.
Okay. Well, Brett, what were your general thoughts and takeaways as you saw it last night?
Yeah. We were there opening night. We had a great crowd. It was IMAX. Full theater, which you just don't get much these days. So I think that helped amplify the experience. A rowdy crowd can, or a disruptive crowd can sometimes kind of taint a film's experience. But everyone was super into this movie. People weren't on their phones, and so just that setting. I'm hoping. This doesn't speak to the film at all, but it's just a elusive experience in the movie theater these days, I feel like, whereas that used to be more common, and so it was great to get back to that. The film itself, I think, is great. I'm going to echo Trevor's kind of comments, except that I didn't find the score a step down. I wouldn't say it's a step up either. I just think it's different. I think it has a vibe that fits with the themes of this part more than what part 1 was. I think the acting was stellar across the board. There are no bad performances in this film, and I kind of have like broad stroke. I know what happens in the books, but I definitely don't know enough to be like, it poorly adapts this portion. So kind of just as a general audience goer who doesn't know all that stuff, it was phenomenal. I loved it.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I'll throw some stuff in here. So I have not read the books. I am just a very much avid sci-fi fan, movie sci-fi fan, and a huge Denis Villeneuve fan. And I have to say that this was through and throughout an epic. I think that's really the only way I can really categorize it. I heard a lot before the movie came out that this was supposed to be like a pretty much the best sequel since Empire Strikes Back, or on par with Empire Strikes Back. I don't think there are any real correlations between the two. I think they're completely different thematically and just different pace-wise and story-wise and action-wise. And I did not feel that connection at all. I also don't think this movie's already getting a lot of people's, this is the 10 out of 10. Best movie I've seen in 10 years. I don't think it's that, but I don't think it's bad. I just think it's epic as fuck. There were several times where I was watching this movie where I almost had tears rolling down my face just with how epic the scene was happening. And I know the score, I do actually agree with Trevor that I think the score isn't as good as part one. But I think Villeneuve just has such an amazing ability to incorporate his soundtracks into the movie with, obviously the fantastic cinematography and just the way that he shoots his film. And I know it's kind of been circulating around Twitter about he thinks that movies dialogue's like the least important thing about a movie. I don't know if you guys saw that, but he kind of took some shots on dialogue and said people don't remember movies by its dialogue. And
I don't know if I agree with that.
well, that's what he said.
I think it's been a little overhyped by the media.
But
I think in context that I can understand it, but
and I think
all in all,
yeah, I think what he was trying to say is like there are obviously films that are iconic that have iconic dialogue, but like when you're watching a movie, you want to feel and like your atmosphere, your sound, your shots, your acting is really what gets that. The dialogue can sometimes be the least important part of that. But anyways, aside from that, I think he personifies that in this movie because there are so many times where in the shot you feel exactly the way that Villeneuve wants you to feel without a dialogue option. And he did that in the first, of course, but I think it's just exuberated. I don't know if that's the right word. In this movie, those scenes were really over the top and wonderfully crafted to make it feel epic. And that's why I always, when I'm thinking about this movie, I just circle back to how epic it was. And it didn't do what I thought it was going to do. The characters didn't necessarily do what I thought they would do, nor did I want them to do. There were some of character relations that didn't feel sometimes correct. Like there were scenes missing between characters to get them to where they eventually were, which maybe we can dig into more. But there were just things that I wasn't like, holy hell, this is the greatest movie I've seen in the last 10 years. But I still had one of the best theater experiences I've had in a long time. I still think Oppenheimer's the best movie I've seen probably in the last 10 years. But this is absolutely still a fantastic film. But the problem is, of course, anytime you put a movie at just, this is the greatest thing since Empire Strikes Back, I'm going to go in expecting something that's going to knock me off my ass. And I definitely felt, a lot of emotion and was very blown away by a lot of what happened. But I definitely didn't walk away with, this is a bona fide 10 out of 10, greatest thing I've seen in 10 years. But I did walk away with, that was amazing. It was really long, but I absolutely still loved it. And I unfortunately can't wait to see what happens next.
We got done with this, and I was like, now I got to read Messiah? What?
what?
Yeah. So there's a slight spoiler, but I didn't, just slight.
Nah.
Okay, yeah. So that's most of my general thoughts on the movie. So you guys have anything you wanted to add on any of our takes?
Well, I do just... sorry, go ahead, Trevor.
Oh, okay. I just have a quick thing.
Yeah.
I think that line of thinking with the dialogue thing comes from that idea of the
Show,
idea
don't
is
tell?
like you should be able to turn a movie sound off and still understand what's happening. And I think and you look at films like The Passion of the Joan of Arc, which is silent, but it's also like 2.5 hours, just like this one, and that's considered like one of the greatest movies of all time. And so I think that's where that line. So that's an interesting experiment, And somebody recently, I think, like watched Babylon with the sound off or something, and like that's the only way they ever watched it. I can't remember who. I think like a critic or something off the top of my head. But anyway, so I was going to chime that in earlier. Sorry, go ahead, Brett.
I just to kind of riff on the Dune Messiah comment there, Easton. I don't know if that's necessarily. I don't necessarily agree that that's a spoiler in that like there could be a part 3, because I think in the same way that Dune Part 1, it feels like there could be more, but it also that movie could stand on its own.
Dune Part 1?
Dune Part 1. It's
Oh,
not.
I don't know about
It's
that.
it's not a happy ending, but it could stand on its own. I think this too could stand at, probably not on its own, but as Dune Part 1 and 2 could be the completed story. Again, I don't think it's I don't think Paul's arc is complete,
Yeah.
but in terms of how so many people today, and I don't think this is right, but so many people today are like, they care about the plot over the themes. That idea of him taking that's maybe a spoiler.
You didn't say
where-
anything, so you're good. You didn't say anything. You stopped yourself before you said it. So
where it ends,
yeah,
I think completes at least a portion of the story's arc in a way that could be satisfactory.
Yeah.
And so whatever they decide to give us with a potential third Dune movie, I think would just be icing on the top. And it seems like it would be bonkers based on where this movie ends. So I'm equally very excited, but at the same time incredibly satisfied with what we got in part 2.
Yeah.
I've heard if you want to know all of Paul's story, you should read Dune and then Dune Messiah. If you like the weirdness, but if you are okay with where it ends, you should just do the first one. I think that goes the same for the movies, probably, or it's going to be the same for the movies, probably. Just stopping here, I think, is a good end. Not a great end, but it is a good end.
I do think this film as well balances the weirdness of the Dune universe. It's certainly weird, and there are things that just are a little bonkers, but it's not so much. There's not so much weirdness that it really doesn't feel. It doesn't feel outside of itself, I guess. It doesn't get too tripped up on, I'm thinking specifically about something in the original. I say the original, the 80s Dune movie, and it's in the books. But the space engineers are these incredibly weird creatures, and how humanity has evolved in this world in the book. We really only kind of mess with the Bene Gesserits in the movies here, and I think that's just enough. It's just enough to be like, this is kind of a fun sci-fi fantasy without it being like bonkers computer spacemen who have.
For a movie, it's a good mixture of sci-fi lore and character story. When you're doing a movie and you only have a finite amount of time, you have to have a good balance of setting up lore for your universe while also keeping you engaged in the stories that keep you in a movie. And Villeneuve, I think, is a very good person at doing that. And I think that's something that, like, George Lucas with the prequels had some problems with. Not to go, I'm just going with another sci-fi, which is why some people thought the original, not the prequels were a little bit less, is because they were so lore based and less, there's an amazing story. I'm a prequel lover, so there's an amazing story there, but there's a lot of lore stuff and politics and Star Wars lore that you have to get through. But these movies have a great balance of you're getting thrown into these lore moments and trying and understanding why these things are happening in the intergalactic battle that's been happening for centuries and centuries. But then you're also getting thrown into a very personal story and conflict that's happening right on screen. So that, you're really jumping back and forth, which helps an audience stay engaged in it. But sometimes, sci-fi can get a little away with its lore. I do think that this movie does a great job. There were a few times where we kept on going back to, I can't think of the names. Trevor probably knows them, but the bald, not Atreides,
the Harkonnens.
Harkonnens. There were a few times where they spent a lot of time with the Harkonnens, and I started to get a little like, okay, we've been here a little long. We've been away from our main characters a little too long. But then, 5 minutes later, it would finally get back to our main story. And then, you just have to have a good balance. And it does a pretty good job of that.
Nice.
Okay. Last thing I'll say is, Brett, you said that these, that you feel like it could be its own. Like
1 and 2. I think. Yeah.
It's totally fine, but I 100% disagree. I think that this leads at a direct cliffhanger where, like, you can definitely leave a movie expecting a number 2 and that be fine. But, like, I think that this movie was very much set up as and it felt like there is definitely a next part of this that I have to watch. And it's leading me and expecting me to watch that last half. I feel like it was very much of this is the end of Act 2. Where's the, like, we're getting to, like, there's a whole nother end of this story that we're about to get into. Very much like, not quite as bad, but pretty similar to Alita Battle Angels. Again, another sci-fi. I think by itself, I personally like the movie and I think it's fine, but it definitely sets you up like there's gonna be a next part of this. And we may never get it. And technically, we may never get Messiah. This could be it. He wants Messiah, but this could be it. And I think it still stands strong as 2 really good movies. But I think that it definitely does leave you as this should not be the end of the story that we see. And I don't think movies need closure necessarily, but I think it's really opening you up to this is not the end of the Dune story, the Atreides story, the I can't think of Zendaya's people's name at the moment. The
Fremen.
The Fremen, like, this is not the end of the Fremen story. And, specific characters within those. Like, that feels like there's a whole nother story to be told with these people.
Yeah, and I won't disagree with you in the statement of that final scene teed up something, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's very clear. I think the rest of the film, though, and especially the third act, does a good job of satisfying what the motivations coming out of Dune Part 1 were.
Okay, that's fair.
Everything I think that's going to happen in Dune, I mean, I don't know. I shouldn't make assumptions. But the point being, I think if you take away that last bit of VO and kind of exposition on from a certain character, like you take that away and it's like, okay, well, that was like an incredibly satisfying way for X character to get, to here at the end of Part 1 and now to here at the end of Part 2. And like you said earlier, there's not very many characters in this film that make, quote unquote, the decision you'd like them to make. Mm-hmm. But that it still feels good even if it were to end with that kind of like, oh, I'm disappointed that that's how they got to here. But that's kind of the world we live in. Like, it's just universe, right? Like, Game of Thrones is not pretty and pink and sunshine and rainbows. Neither is Dune. This is just Game of Thrones in space.
Trevor hasn't watched Game of Thrones because he hates me, so that's not a good reference.
Sorry, Trevor.
He may also not be able to hear us at the moment for some reason. Yeah, that's all totally fine. I just it just definitely, and maybe it's kind of has that Across the Spider-Verse thing where like it could have been a drawn up thing and they decided to do a little extra that made it really feel like it had that needed that extra bit or needed that extra film.
Yeah,
and maybe that's it. But yeah, I definitely feel like this story, like I would be upset if this is the end of the story. Even if it's like, even if the finish of the movie isn't what I want, that's totally fine. I'm okay with a movie that doesn't end the way that I want it to. But it doesn't feel like the story is finished. And I feel like with a movie at this scale, you should have some sort of this, like, this is the end of this saga even. You know, I mean, we're talking about sci-fi, so, I mean, we're centuries and centuries and centuries of stories and lore and stuff. So, like, you know, the story's never done. But, you know, this saga, this story, these people. This
portion. And especially since in this, and I don't think this is spoilery, you can mute it out, I guess, or bleep it out later if you want. But like the story does get a little bigger than part one in that we're talking more about the Imperium and we're introducing the Emperor and some of those politics at play with the Bene Gesserit that are kind of hinted at in the first film. So that idea that, okay, Arrakis and this point in time, you know, there needs to be a bow tie. You know, we need to tie the bow on this story. You're right that this film does not deliver that. I think it's more satisfactory to me in the personal, in almost tragic ways that characters end up where they're at.
Sure.
So we could go back and forth on this, but I actually don't think we disagree that much. It's
I'm totally cool. I just wanted some extra talking points and some stuff the way that I thought about that. Any last general thoughts that you guys last things you want to bow tie up?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Like Trevor, real quick, like Trevor said, or no, not Trevor. Easton, like Easton said earlier, this is a movie to be viewed on the biggest screen possible. Yeah. It is. Greg Fraser and Denny did a phenomenal job shooting this movie. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, and I think right now we're watching some of the two greatest filmmakers to ever make films, in Denis Villeneuve and Christopher Nolan. So do not. Yeah, you'll get FOMO if you aren't watching these movies in theaters, because you'll be looking back at some of the greatest, you know, feats in movie history, and you know, you just went to go watch
the Badlands.
Oh, I was gonna
Bad, whatever it's called. I don't
Borderlands?
know. No,
Borderlands.
There's a movie called The Badland or Land of Bad.
Yes, yeah. No, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Or you go to the movies and just watch the Marvels. And, you know, that's what you're going with, which are it's perfectly fine. They're fun. They're dumb, whatever. But, like, these movies are shot and made to be watched in theaters, and they feel so much stronger when they are. So, yeah, my last things is 100%. Please go and watch this. Recommendations, kind of. Definitely go watch these things ASAP if you feel like. There were a lot of people that didn't watch Dune Part 1 because it was a Part 1 and because it was long and it had some people just saying that it was slow, and those aren't necessarily false. But now Part 2 is out, so you can go watch Part 1 on HBO Max or buy it, rent it, and then go watch Part 2 back to back like I did. I finished Part 1. I mean, I've watched it obviously in theaters back in the day, but I finished Part 1 and then 15 minutes later Part 2 started. Like I finished it at home and went straight to the theater and watched Part 2. And it was a great, you know, transition. So you can just do that now. You know, it's out. You don't have to wait. Just, you know, go watch these. You will definitely be blown away with the magnitude of what they put on the screen. So, recommendations, and we'll hit spoilers.
Yeah, I recommend. I think you should probably watch the first one first.
Yeah.
I also I had a quick thing I wanted to mention. I remember there was a lot of hate for Austin Butler's portrayal of Fade Rautha, and a specific screenshot of him shouting. There's a reason that it was all in black and white, and then he looks kind of weird. If that's what's prohibiting you from seeing it is Austin Butler's weird face, it's fine. Go see it. That's just it's that way for a reason. But yeah, be a part of the zeitgeist. Go see these things.
Yeah, a heavy recommendation for me. I think that it's super approachable. If you've seen the first one, I would echo your guys' statements. Watch the first one. You will probably be lost without it. But
and the first one's great.
And the first one is great. But it's
great.
for as epic and as big heady sci-fi as Dune is. I feel like this film does such a good job of bringing you along and making you feel like Easton was saying. Oh gosh, I cannot remember which one of you said what earlier.
It's all good. Like someone said.
Like someone said, it's a movie that it lets you feel what you need to, even if you're not understanding who. I can't remember what do they call. What's Paul's Fremen name, or like if you even don't remember what the word Fremen is. yeah. But you don't need to know that to understand the story. Like that's what's so great about it.
Yeah.
So
well, we'll put that to the test when Tristan watches this tomorrow. You guys should know Tristan by now. She is not catch on to sci-fi very well. She'll get lost. So if she still feels it, then we've got a winner. Okay, so that's the end of the spoiler review. We may or may not have an ad, and then we'll get right back for the spoiler part of the review. All right, we're back.
We're back
after that short little break. Yeah, Trevor knew what I was trying to say. And so now we're getting to spoilers. So if you've not seen Dune Part 2, we will be spoiling things. Yeah, if you care about spoilers, don't keep listening. But if you don't, or you've already watched it, keep listening. And we're going to get into all of the things we liked and disliked about the entire plot and everything that spoils things. And so, Trevor, I think it's probably smart that you start off since you have all the book adaptation stuff that you can chat about. And then once we get done talking about kind of that book adaptation changes and stuff like that, we'll start getting into the movie part of it. Not to get it out of the way, but just I think that's a good way to start off. Sure.
We'll start with the thing that I liked. There's a whole big description about how to ride the worm, and Villeneuve solves it like I snapped it because you didn't hear it.
Yeah.
Solves it like that. And you guys can probably tell, like, the hooks get into, like, the flesh, and the worms don't like having sand in there, and that's how they keep them above the ground, and that's how they can get them to go where they want. Yeah. So, like, that was expertly solved.
Yeah. And one of the small benefits of a movie compared to a book, because a book, I could see that you kind of need to, because not only do you, like, you can't just say the worms don't like sand and whatever, like, you have to really explain what a worm looks like, their exterior, how
and
they
how
move,
the hooks operate,
how the hooks operate.
That was the hardest.
With a visual, media, you can just they see them,
watch it,
and they see the whole. That's cool.
Yeah. So the things that I didn't vibe with, the book has a lot more, like, the Bene Gesserit plays such a bigger role, and just role of, like, female, and that was a big F, sorry, female influence in general is way more prevalent in the book. Aaliyah, his sister, is born. There's a time jump that we just skipped over and just had everything happen back to back. Like, Aaliyah, I think is 2 or like 4. Like, she's born, and he's been living with the Freeman for a while. And
so before you move on from that, I think that is very interesting, because it did feel like there was a lot of time passing, and you knew that this had to have been less than 9 months. Yeah. And I think that was a detriment to the story, because they really made you feel like they were fighting years and years of this battle. Like, Paul was fighting years and years of this battle. I mean, they even had his eye change before he took the blue water. I can spoil things, so he drank of the water of life. He had blue eyes before that, and the max he was there was 7 to 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that was I didn't know that was a specific choice to not have his sister be born yet, but I think that was a detriment to the overall, like, just looking at it as a whole. I was definitely very curious on why she was just very pregnant.
Aaliyah's
and
the
didn't
one that's
have a
supposed to
2-year-old.
kill Baron.
What?
Aaliyah kills Baron in the book, not Paul.
As a 2-year-old?
Aaliyah, yeah. Because
Okay.
she's born as a fully developed Reverend Mother. It's
Yeah.
wild,
The
man.
2-year-old? Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know if all of that was needed. But it's still being born, and like you can still have this telepathical conversation between mother and daughter, and it be a 2 or 3-year-old, because a 2 or 3-year-old does not have functional cognitive, communication. Obviously I don't have a child yet, but all of the 2 and 3-year-olds I've been around, they can have conversations and they can talk, but it's not, of the same, it's not full cognitive conversation yet. So you could still have that telepathical relationship between them and full understanding, and not have them be, baby genius it around and fully walking around and beating up people, and killing people, and it still feel like it, and I feel like that would have fit better in the time frame.
Yeah,
Is what I'm getting
I'll
at.
just try to hit the rest of these quick.
Yeah, sorry.
Because I could really just delve on this, but
Rude.
Chani's devotion to Paul is not as wavering in the book as it is in the movie. And I feel like that was a detriment. I feel like her motivation kind of does this quite a bit. She kind of settles eventually on like just complacency, which I think is fine, but she's really devoted to him. And there's also some polyamory in the book. Paul is supposed to inherit Janus's, the guy he killed, supposed to inherit his wife and 2 kids because he bested him in battle. So Paul technically has 3 wives by the end of the book. I think Chani gets pregnant in the book. At the end, and I know I'm going to jump, but it's just a little thing.
It's all good.
I was really looking forward to, there's this really great kind of closing line at the end of the book where Reverend Mother, Paul's mother, tells Chani after Paul basically takes the Emperor's daughter as his wife, she tells Chani, like, don't despair, don't discourage, because I was a consort to Duke Atreides, and it's women like us that rule the universe. And that's how the book ends. And so it really kind of like wraps up, like, this story is about like the secondary people, the people that we forget about, and the people that we
The Jezreel. Right?
Yeah, the people that we like cast aside. The freemen are not like first class citizens. Chani is not the first primary wife. She, at the end of the book, is actually Paul's consort, basically. But like, they're the people that you have to look out for. They're the people that can turn around and like change the fate of the galaxy, kind of thing. And so I really was kind of bummed that we missed out. That being said, another good thing. One more. Sorry, I'm trying to be fast.
It's okay.
The fight that Feyd-Rautha has with the Atreides prisoner is a lot more menacing and a lot more foretelling of the final fight you'll have with Paul. Did you guys know his shorter sword is poisoned?
No.
Yeah, his shorter blade is poisoned, and that's why it's such a big deal when he pulls it out at the end during the end duel. Is because, and that's why he dies immediately, and why Paul is able to pull his out of him is because that short blade is a poison blade. So he cheats.
Interesting.
That's the big
So
thing. That
does
Feyd-Rautha cheats.
Does it say that?
I don't know that if
Okay.
it's supposed to be poisoned in the movie or
Well,
not.
So
But that's
in the
his whole
movie,
shtick.
it does say that the shorter blade needs to be sharper.
Yeah, or something.
So maybe that was supposed to be a
Like a foretelling or for something. I know
Like a
what you're-
reference?
Yeah.
just kind of telling you that he's wanting something more than just a blade. Like,
Yeah,
there is a
fair.
word I'm looking for, but I'm not going to spend the time trying to find it because we're on a podcast. Where it may be trying to tell the audience that a sharp blade that can slice someone's throat open right away. He is wanting something a little bit more potent than that. So maybe that was like a like it's not going to just tell the audience that he's cheating and wants these blades that are poisoned, but
yeah. And they have in the initial fight in the arena, him and that prisoner have a whole back and forth about the Atreides bloodline and how he believes Paul is still alive, kind of thing. So that's the other kind of thing I was like, But another good thing is that the final fight, the attack on Arrakeen, is just as short and just as explosively dangerous as it is in the book. That was a very good representation of how it happens. It's short and it's fast, and Paul is like in the Emperor's chamber immediately.
Yeah, and it was. I think that was really well done. Like I think it set it up really well. Yeah. It was shot really well. It was planned really well.
And they shoot the rocks because the rocks can get through the shield. And the guy I was watching with it, he was like, "Why didn't they just nuke the city?" And I'm like, "Well, because the shields play a big part." Blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
But so those are kind of just the broad overstatements of like the book.
Well,
to movie
and they also
things
didn't want to kill the Emperor.
Right.
Like you can't just nuke the thing because even if you have like the slow those rockets that get to the shield and they stop
and then they
slowly penetrate
and burrow. Yeah.
Even if you have those, like I'm sorry, I watched Dune. Like I said, I watched Dune 1 right before the movie, so I saw all those really cool things. But even if you have that, like you still can't kill the Emperor. You can't risk that. You just want to kill the soldiers. So, I remember now. You said that the waveringness of Zendaya's character, Johnny.
Yeah.
Is her name Johnny, right?
Shawnee.
Yeah. I feel like even as somebody that hasn't read the book, the wavering of her character did not fit very well. That's when I said that there were scenes and things that I felt like were missing. That's what I felt like
I knew instantly that that's what you were talking about.
Because the way that she jumps back and forth between being fully devoted to and then like even if you don't understand and don't believe in him being a messiah and you don't believe in this indoctrination of religion and whatnot, if that's what you think, and that's all totally fine. I think that this movie's integration of religion and foresight and all of that, and I think this movie's integration of time is very Christopher Nolan-ish, which I think is hilarious and I love. Because we're constantly seeing the future and the past throughout both Dune 1 and Dune Part 2. And it's not until this movie that we really get a clear understanding of what that is. But nonetheless, it just never really made sense why, even if she has doubts on the Messiah herself, she never seems to have doubts on Paul. But then every time there's a decision and whatnot, she doesn't like that Paul is making
becoming
these
a
decisions
dictator.
or being a part of, or being just being a leader. Like he's not really being a dictator until maybe the end, if you want to say that. But he is like, and if you want to say, we can get into whether or not Paul is a good person or not later if we want to. But like as he's constantly saying that he doesn't call himself the Messiah, and again I think that's some weird stuff with the movie if we don't know if that's his true motivation or not, because we're getting conflicting ideas within the movie itself. I don't know. There's a lot of moving parts here that I'm all saying at once, but the point is I did feel like Zendaya's character, Johnny, was completely devoted to Paul and followed him through everything, but then we also saw her continuously dislike the things that he was doing, and it did not make sense when they were happening. And that's what I felt like was a little off. I think that's the correct way of saying it, because there's so much going on. I tried to explain this movie to Tristan after I watched it, and I said this is an overly complex story with 1,000 moving parts, with the future and the past and all of that being put together. You very much have the not to put Marvel into this, but the Doctor Strange, there's only one path kind of thing. Which I think is very interesting, but also adds a lot more complexity to the story that we're being told. And I don't know, there's a lot of, and I like the complexity. Don't get me wrong, but I do think that some of the stuff was not shown perfectly. That made me sit like I was sitting there questioning the decisions, not because I didn't think that they were making the right decision, but it didn't feel like that character would be making that decision at that point in time. And so I feel like something was either missing or they did the thing because they needed them to be in a certain place at that time. And that kind of took me out of it. I hope that was said well enough.
Here's my 2 cents on Shawnee, because I think that relationship between her and Paul is the weakest of the relationships, right? In terms of like, how do I relate to another person? I think like him and his mother have a very complicated, but I understand it and it makes sense. I'd never felt like I got to the point where I understood why Shawnee was so in love with Paul. I like the idea of her, and I think it makes sense story-wise because she is so, I don't know, postmodern in the sense of like, religion is silly. I'm going to be the thing that is the change in the world.
And in the context of this movie, that idea makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And
I
every
think that's done
time
really
Paul
well.
takes a step like closer towards embodying what the prophecy says, I think it makes sense for her to be like, oh, wait a second. But I never felt like there was that connection to like, why is she so in love with him? Like,
That's
I
funny.
didn't get there. Like, I understood that was where she was, but I didn't feel like there was ever that. They have great chemistry, don't get me wrong, but it's like, like what you were saying with, it felt like a scene was cut where they had a talk on top of a sand dune and it just made sense why they were so in love.
So,
right?
I would say I do kind of get what you're saying, but I feel like this is kind of a sense of like a young love, like when you're just in love, you're in love, and like
Sure.
things don't.
It's not
like,
logical.
Yeah, and like
It's
you
just attraction.
You just feel what you feel, and also not only that, several times throughout, I believe it's this movie. Like it could be. We also see some sprinkles in Dune 2, or Dune Part 1, but I think it's mainly in the beginning of this movie. She continuously calls Paul an amazing fighter, and I think that might be
Fadakin.
like what?
That's sorry. It's the word they have for it. The Fadakin.
Okay.
Fadakin.
And I think that is like the really big attraction initially for Zendaya, and then also like, and then after that, like he proves his fighting at the very end of Dune Part 1, where he fights
Jonas.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
do have like a altercation between all of them, and he proves himself as a very formidable fighter, and then he goes and and him and Zendaya are fighting, against the spice thieves, whatever you want to call
Like
them.
the harvesters, yeah.
Yeah, and he's obviously done a fantastic job throughout that. So I think there's like she is a very like she may be progressive in her views on religion and stuff like that, and the fact that she's a freedom fighter and fights and all that, but then she's very non-modern when it comes to her attraction in males. It's, I want somebody that's going to fight and likes that, I know this is a really gross term, but alpha male kind of person that is the leader, is the fighter, is the, and I think that's where that attraction comes from. And then it's fucking Timothy Chalamet. I mean, he's an attractive dude. Let's just be honest here. So,
Timmy.
he may be a skinny, scrawny, sexy dude, but then in the movie he's a menace on the battlefield. So you've got a win-win. So
That's true.
He's a real pale boy out there, isn't he? Like,
well, compared to all of the Fremen, yeah.
You gotta teach him how to tan.
That's right.
I mean, he was out there
Pretty
long
boy,
enough. He
so
should have
tan
tanned.
very
His
well.
face should have tanned a little bit, but
Right.
they do cover him head to toe. So I guess it makes sense that they wouldn't be all the way tan. But
So the character to me that really stole the show anytime he was on screen was Javier Bardem as Stilgar.
I'm very
Oh,
glad
yeah.
you
He
didn't
had-
say Christopher Walken, because I was about to just boot you off this podcast.
Oh no. Walken was fine. The Emperor is a very
If
small
that's what you
role.
want to say.
And he not to detract, but he services that part. Like
I think so.
He does his job and then he goes home.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
He's just Christopher Walken on the seat. Like
He's
I don't
really
think
trying to hide that accent.
He didn't act at all. He was just literally himself on the throne, and it did not feel right. But anyways, sorry, tangent.
Oh no,
Go ahead.
I loved how much comedy he brought to a very serious, heavy movie, while also being like the guy who's. This is like, the second coming of Christ, right? Like, we gotta go spread the gospel to the South. And just
that's
how the
actually
writing of his and the acting, it just all worked for me.
Was your theater cracking up during this movie? Because mine was.
We laughed a lot, yeah.
I thought that was completely unexpected. My theater was cracking up during this movie. So you said that Javier was extremely funny, and he was, and that made me think of how many times my theater was just like had audible laughs across, like we were watching a comedy. Like our movie was pretty silent, thankfully. Like there were people were really, I don't know if they were liking it or disliking it, but they were engaged, and then they were really laughing at the jokes that were in this. They were good contextual humor.
Mm-hmm.
Me and
Agreed.
the guy I watched it with, we laughed. I think we laughed the most probably in the theater. But the part we laughed at the most was the Spice Depot, and you just see the wide shot of it, and then you hear that little boop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole thing goes
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
Man, we laughed for like a solid 15 seconds.
No, there are a lot of really good comedic moments in this. That did not happen in Dune Part 1, by the way. That is very much addition of the characters that we have in this movie. So I think that's very interesting because the movie itself is not being funny. They're allowing characters to be themselves. They have character development and people are themselves, and they allow characters to, like, they write a character to be somebody and they let them be that. And there were a few characters that were just funny individuals, and they allowed them to be funny, because I do not remember laughing at all, I think, in Dune Part 1. I think there were a few moments here and there, but mainly with, like, the same thing, character Jason Momoa. He's a funny guy. His character was very loose and cracking a few jokes towards Timothée Chalamet, but for the most part, the movie is pretty serious and grand. This movie definitely allowed its moments to be funny, which I think is really interesting and cool. Yeah.
The guy I watched this with, we sat down and he goes, "Man, I really hope Jason Momoa survived the first movie. I would really love for him to come back." And I'm like, "Well, buddy, I got some news for you. I'm so sorry."
So
I hope you like Josh Brolin.
Yeah, like on the flip side of that, though, there were also like some moments that were legitimately like I didn't know how to feel. The first one, and it's probably weird, I don't know why this affected me, but the drowning of the baby worm was like hard for me to watch, legitimately, and I don't know why.
Well, I think the reason is because it seemed senseless at the beginning.
Yeah,
You didn't know why it was happening.
Yeah.
Like, well, maybe Trevor did, but as like I felt the same way. I was like, why? Like, this person tells you to show them, and then they just go and murder
And this is
worm?
This is someone who is clearly a caretaker of this kind of a creature, right?
Yeah.
And so that was a moment. There were, the final fight between Paul and
that was a really
the
good fight.
Harkonnen cousin. I cannot remember his name right now, but Fade. They like drop the score to like nothing, and it's just those two staring each other down, and it like I was afterwards. I was like, okay, I can finally breathe again when it's done, right? Like, whew.
Yeah. Well, I think and I'm speculating. I mean, I don't know how you feel, but I think maybe the reason the worm death, because like the Alud Shaddai or whatever they call it, it's that's like a symbol of religion to them. Like
It
the
is.
worm,
It's like
the worm
it's
is
like
holy.
yeah, they're like yeah, yep.
Yeah, and so and we had just come off of seeing Paul write it for the first time, and that's when we get that mode, that like the Dune mode, the ba-dee-da-da-da. That's the first time we hear it in this movie. When he's, and it's so faint, and he's like all the sand and stuff, and then 20 minutes later, we see one of these holy symbols get murdered, basically, like almost for a senseless reason, and of course the reason is it's a part of the Bene Gesserit's plan to get Paul to become the Kwisatz Haderach, but well, I hate that I'm talking like this, but I think maybe that's why. And the worm is like aggressive. Like when it pops out and it wraps around her, I was kind of like, oh, crap.
Oh yeah, like an anaconda, and
yeah, and it's kind of like, and and then its death is not easy. Like
no,
when it does succumb, like it kind of opens up a little bit, and like it relaxes, and yeah, it is. I don't know if that was Villanueva's intention to make that such a almost like raw moment, but it is.
I'm sure it was definitely a reason, or on purpose.
He is a director who lets a scene play, right? Like he's not afraid.
That's a good way to say it. Yeah.
He's not afraid to, give it an extra beat where most directors would just cut, or like I think maybe a less disciplined director or an editor would be like, we got to cut into a close up of this struggle, and it's like, no, you just hang back and watch the creature struggle, and you see that sense of despair, and then as it's giving up and as it's dying, like that hits you harder, I think, when it's all in one unbroken shot.
Well, and I think it's also a good foretelling, because in this movie we see, Paul talks about how he's going to lead them to paradise, and he also we see a vision of Arrakis in the future. He's coming off of a dune to an ocean.
Yeah.
If water is there, the worms are not, and if the worms are not, then spice is not.
Right.
So I think that's also a part of that scene.
Wasn't it his sister, not him?
There's two.
His sister
there's one
was
where or maybe
there.
it was the same scene, but he's walking down a dune and there's an ocean and a dune. But
I just thought it was his sister who saw that, meaning that it was past his life.
Whatever it was, he saw it. And it was the idea of like water and sand combining.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. All very good stuff.
I hate that they call it spice, because I still think of like the spices I have on my shelf back there, and not like fuel for hyperdrive engines.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's a drug.
Well, it's everything. Spice,
Yeah.
And I don't think that's something I think that they don't do a very good job, just period, in this movie. No, I don't think there's much room for them to. All you need to know is spice is important, but in the books they talk about like spice is like the stuff that makes hyperdrive engines go for space travel, and it's it's in everything. Like if you control spice, you control the galaxy.
It tells you that a lot in Dune Part 1.
Okay, I haven't seen it in a minute.
I know. Yeah, that's why I'm saying it. They definitely lay into it a little bit, and they get into how important the spice is. They kind of have like the spice monologue explaining what spice is and how important it is. And they go back to it every once in a while and say, if you control the spice, you control the wealth. They talk about how the Harkonnen, I'm so surprised I remembered that name, how they have become basically more powerful than the Emperor because they've controlled the spice for so long, and how much money and wealth that they've gained from that and all of that. So they do a good job. Like, so if you're watching this Part 1 to Part 2, like, you will understand that importance. And that foreshadowing of maybe, like, I didn't catch that, the fact that the water and the sand meet and what that means to the worms. So,
and that's something I was telling a friend earlier. I my score is going to reflect this a little bit, I think, but I think I would maybe like Part 2 a little bit better if I watched them back to back, like if I watched them as a single unit. But so I need to do that, I think, before I give this. Like, I'll give a tentative rating today, but like I think I need to withhold and see what it looks like seeing those back to back.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very glad that I did that. I'm very glad that I put a part 1 to part 2. And I just remember I haven't seen part 1 since I walked out of the theaters the second time. I watched it twice in theaters. And I very much knew that it was when I walked out both times, I was like, I'm so ready for part 2. And so I didn't want to watch it again because I knew like I'm just going to be wanting that second part. And so I didn't want to just keep, killing myself with like preparation of this second movie that I'm not getting yet. And so I very much wanted to go, back to back, and I'm very glad that I did. And I think it does run pretty well together. You get about 5 minutes at the beginning of the movie with the Florence Pugh dialogue, monologue. That doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it runs together, but then after that ends, it feels like you're getting right off to where, you're right after the end of part 1. So,
which is interesting because the entire book is set to the backdrop. Princess Irulian's monologue is the first thing you read in the book.
Yeah. Which makes sense.
And
I
get
get that
chapter.
Now,
yeah, and so I thought that's another thing I think that, and because she has also been a Jesuit. And so I think that it further kind of goes with like, I think there's more that could have been done with this, but I didn't mind it.
Yeah. Okay, do we have any last thoughts here before we get to ratings?
I think that War Council scene may get Timmy an Oscar nom. Not a win, but a nom.
The War
That's fair.
Oscar theme.
The War Council. When he
Oh,
walks in
yes, yeah.
and just
Yeah.
takes
Stilgar.
control of that
All the way in
room.
the South.
And
Yes.
he was like,
Yeah.
I am the Senate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
that was another character thing that I didn't feel like was quite worked out well enough.
I loved it.
No.
I mean-
I love that scene, but I
Sure,
felt
sure.
like there was no build up to it.
We rushed into it. I see what you're
Yeah.
saying. Yes. Yes, we do.
And that's another
For sure.
scene where Chani is like openly going against, like defying him.
Yes.
Mhm.
And so that's another like moment of like, okay, what is your guys' relationship?
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
the problem. You see that they're in love with each other. You see that they're obviously sleeping together, and like they are a couple.
Wait, what?
And then, so when two people are naked in the same tent together, that's usually what happens. And then you also see Johnny, like obviously following him into battle. So she supports what he says as a military leader. So that's why it just felt so off every time that she was, I totally understand the like friction of a messiah, but like they keep on talking about the women, the foreshadowing women,
The Bene Gesserit.
yeah, of how like they come in and they tell the stories and they give these prophecies to give us hope, and so and the point of the hope is to sit there and wait.
hope.
Yeah, is to sit there and wait. And so that they're not uprising yet. And I think that is a fantastic story piece and a great, I think that's a really, really good writing. But then it doesn't make any sense that like they're so averse to Paul as this Messiah because they think that the Jesuit think that they have this story of a Messiah to make them wait, because they're no longer waiting. He's willing to do this right now. He is here now, ready to liberate you. And whether you think that he's the Messiah or not, if you feel like he is a good enough person to help you liberate yourself, it feels like, okay, I don't care if you're the Messiah or not. I'm behind you either way. And that's what the movie was telling us. It was telling us that all these people loved him, whether he was the Messiah or whether he wasn't. But then every time there was like some big, meeting leadership thing, they were like, oh no, but you're not the Messiah, so we can't trust you. But like, you've done it for, like I said, it only says 8 months, but it feels like much longer than 8 months. And they're all acting like it's much longer than 8 months. And he's actively currently helping them push back the oppressors. And so I know that there's a whole bunch extra thematic stuff about, I said we'd get into it, but we haven't, about Paul possibly being a bad person. and whatnot. I don't know what the book says, but I know that everybody that reads the book says that Paul's not a good person.
Results may surprise you.
Huh?
I said results may surprise you.
Yeah. And so that's what I always hear, and I was really expecting that, but so it just all of that just really tonally didn't make sense. That advertation to this Messiah because he's being said that he's Messiah, but then you actually are willing to lead and have him be your leader either way. Like it's just, all that kind of,
I definitely think Denny, my hypothesis would be at the end of Dune 3, we'll look back and we'll see that Shawnee was the moral compass, right? Like she's questioning because we're supposed to question. She's the view of the audience. But we are very accustomed to white boys show up and save indigenous land.
Yeah, lightsaber complex. For
sure. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm point being that I'm glad that they're at least showing that dichotomy within the Fremen themselves, right? Like I'm glad they're not all on board or they're all against, and that there's some complexity there. I do think that you're right in that it can kind of muddy the water when you were moving so quickly because the film is covering a lot of ground, especially when you don't get to the south until the last 45 minutes movie, and you only spend 10 or 15 minutes there, right? Like it's clearly right at the end of Act 2, and they're just there, and then they're back in the north.
Yeah, they do prerequisite several times by saying the South are already religious zealots.
Yeah.
Is that the right word? I think it is.
Fundamentalists.
So like they do already kind of set it up that like they are ready for this Messiah. The North are the ones that are more adverse to Paul being that. So like it does kind of make sense as they kind of run right through the South part because it is, they do prerequisite as being like this is going to be the easy part because
it's ripe for harvest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Okay, are there anything else? I think we spent a good amount of time. Anything else? Either one of you?
Nah, man.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, do you guys think that Paul is a good person, or do you think that it's all? I'm not curious. We don't have to dig into it too much, but do you think that he actually is a bad person that's playing a good person, or that he's a good person that ends up taking people on the wrong path due to whatever circumstances he's in?
Ooh.
And you haven't read Messiah, so you don't.
Not to get super into it. On a What the Fanboy episode recently, I asked you guys, Brett, what Tyler was most excited for seeing the book adaptation, and his response kind of surprised me. That he said to see Paul be full prophet Muad'Dib. Because full prophet Muad'Dib is kind of a very gray character.
Yeah.
And like he goes on this journey from like innocent kid from Caladan, and then as he becomes this prophet, he really leans into it. And so I think this is the most, by the end of part 1 of Dune, like part 1 from like book standpoint, part 2 of the movie, I think that's the most good Paul Muad'Dib that we see. From what I understand, he basically goes on like a galactic genocide. in the coming, and you kind of.
They hint at it, right? Like the last line is like Paul's now started his holy war. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think he is. I think he has good intentions, but I think to to quote Jurassic Park, he wields it like a kid that's found his dad's gun, and now like nothing can stop him,
Yeah.
And his mother sure doesn't seem to do any kind of help to repress his conquest tendencies. But
Yeah.
I think he's begun the path to the darkness, but I think this is the most good we see him.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I agree for the most part. I think he is, fundamentally, he is a character who doesn't desire power. Even we look at the beginning of Dune Part 1 when they're leaving Caldan, and Leto says, comes up to him and says, like, even if you're nothing, even if you don't, want to be the next Duke or whatever, like you'll be everything that you need to be in my son.
Yeah.
And the fact that he spends half of this movie trying to not become, the prophet, I think that at the end of the day, when you're stuck in a shit situation for so long, it's easy to convince yourself that you just have to do what's necessary for the moment, right? I think in his mind, the way he forward, and it all gets so complicated with the Bene Gesserit stuff and all of their plans and the visions and what's true versus not true, but I think he saw a way where he could convince the Emperor to stand down. He could become the Emperor, not out of a sense of, I want to be the Emperor for the power, but just I can end the conflict. But obviously that doesn't happen. In that he convinces the Emperor to give over power, but then the rest of the galaxy is like, nope, not gonna accept that. So I think it's just he's a fundamentally human character, and
Yeah. That's
he
a good way
tries
to
to
put it.
he tries to do good and screws up along the way.
Yeah.
It's definitely an absolute power corrupts absolutely kind of
Yeah.
situation.
So, I will end it before we do ratings here on what my thoughts of whether or not he's a good person. So I think he is a truly good person that is put into a situation of there is no good outcome, and he's going to pick the outcome that's the best for what he thinks is good. Because like you said, or not like you said, like the movie says, he drinks the water of life. He can fully see the outcomes of the future. He gets that. I keep on bringing it back to, in my head, I keep on bringing it back to the Doctor Strange. I can see 1,000 multiverses. This is the one way. And so I think he sees all of these different outcomes and all the things that he has to do. And I think every other, I think there's two things that could possibly be true. He sees all the outcomes, and the path that he decided to take, he took because every other outcome, every other action that he decided to do, that he did, would lead to the eradication of the people of Arrakis.
The Fremen.
Freeman. Yeah, would lead to the eradication of the Freeman. And he doesn't want that because he loves the Freeman. He thinks that they are fantastic people, and he wants to save them. And so I think one option is that that's the case. He sees that there's one way, and that one way is to become the Emperor and have him fight against the other houses, or the other houses, whoever it is. If they kill the Harkonnen, another house is going to come in and try to eradicate for the spice. So the only way to save them is to have them go on a holy war and fight against the houses or whatever. And it may lead to more death, but it's the only way to save the Freeman. The other option is he sees all the futures, and this is the only option for the way for him to get revenge against for his father's death. Those are the two options I see, because it says specifically that he sees that there is one option, or there's a narrow window that he can do. And he words it as in like to save the Fremen. Like there's only one true option. There's one narrow way. Every other way we all die. And so that's what I feel like he's doing. But I do feel like there's a possibility of this second option of he is doing everything out of his stance to do revenge. And it just hasn't shown us that yet. And that's a possibility. But I would like to believe he's a good person, and that's why he's doing this. But the one thing that does keep getting into my mind is when they first go to the holy place of the Fremen. they're having lunch, and he says, "We need to get the non-believers to believe," and that was a very evil phrasing of that, an evil discussion between him and his mother that felt very specific and but then nothing else throughout the rest of the movie felt like that was aligned to his true beliefs. It was maybe just the situation and time that maybe he was like, they believe this. If we need to get off world, if we need to do this, we need to play into this. But then none of the rest of his character matched that. So I really don't know. And that's why I'm so excited to see where it goes. Because even if it doesn't end the way that I want, that's still the story that's being told. And I'll be, I think that'll be interesting. And I think Dennis will be able to show that and do it very well.
Yeah.
So that's my thoughts on Paul. Okay.
Cool.
Anything else? Ratings?
Yeah.
Sure.
Ratings? Okay. Brett, what's your rating out of 5 stars? Unfortunately, you can't do what the fanboy rankings. Nobody here will. Well, some people will know that because a lot of our fan base probably does mull over. But out of 5 stars,
I'm gonna give this. I'm gonna give this a 5 out of 5.
Ooh. 5 out of 5. Okay.
I don't think it's a 10 out of 10.
So it's a 9 out of 10.
But it's a 5 out of 5.
So it should be a 4.5 out of 5.
Nope. You said I don't give half stars. What are you talking about?
Okay, Brett. Trevor
What does
has
that sound like?
corrupted your mind on Letterboxd reviews, but okay.
No, I think there's enough nuance there that if we were going to dissect it down to halves, maybe 4.5. I just loved it though, and I can overlook so many of the pacing issues, and the score worked for me in a way that it didn't for you two, and I will recommend this to practically everyone. So it's a 5 out of 5.
Sweet. Okay. Trevor.
So while I think that part 1 is a very faithful adaptation of the first half of the book, I feel like I've shot myself in the foot by reading it. But I think the second part is not so faithful in the adaptation, and me being me, I can't not take that into account.
Sure.
So this is a 4 out of 5 for me.
Oh, that's still perfectly good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was like if the adaptation it took you down to like a 2.5. I feel like that would have been a little strong, but no, 4. Yeah.
It was a combo of that and the score. That's what it ended up bringing it.
You are very big.
Of course, the
person,
the music man over there is gonna be extra attentive to the score.
Yeah. Well, come eat your dinner. So, I think I'm 4.5. So I think we have a good round here. That might be just because of the expectation of just how high people were having this movie and how much I love Dune Part 1 and how much I wanted Dune Part 2 to be like the greatest and most epic sci-fi movie I'd ever seen, which Blade Runner 2049 was for me. So like in comparison, Blade Runner 2049 was like the perfect sequel I've ever seen in a sci-fi movie. Maybe, Empire Strikes Back is in there and whatnot, but yeah, so I think 4.5 is, and that's still fantastic. I absolutely had an amazing time. That puts Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 both at 4.5 stars, which is fantastic. I think it's a great dual movie, and I think it'll be an absolutely fantastic, one of the best trilogies of all time, if and when Messiah does come out. I would like Denis Villeneuve to do some other stuff, but at the same time, I can't wait for Messiah. So like
maybe he'll pull a Christopher Nolan and do whatever he did when he was doing Batman.
He's already said that Messiah wouldn't be his next film.
Yeah.
I mean, unless studio pressure, but he's
also said that he wants time.
Yeah.
He wants this to sit. And I think, I don't know that, like I said, I haven't read the books. I assume that Dune and Dune Messiah has a gap in time maybe. And so maybe he wants you to sit on that for a little bit. We sat on Dune Part 1 to Dune Part 2 for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Has a series
4 or
been
5?
4 years?
No,
Dune
it's been
Part 1 came out in 2021, so 4
21
years.
to 24. That's 3.
So 3 years, yeah.
3 years.
Still.
It was supposed to be 2, but it ended up being 3. But I do think it'll be more time between Dune Part 2 and Messiah, which is fine. But it does need, I think it does need another edition to close up the Dune story. Okay. I think that's good.
Sweet.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Make
Thanks
sure to
for
like and
having us.
subscribe and everything. Make sure to follow their shows, Deconstructing the MCU, What the Fanboy. Be on the lookout for Brett's new movie that he directed, short film that's coming out very soon. And yeah, make sure to tune in next week as we're hopefully getting back into it with the Movie Moron, especially with Oscars coming up. So yeah, thank you so much and see you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Hey, moron!
You talking to me? You talking to me?
And there seems to be no sign of intelligent life anywhere.
Hello?
What an idiot!
What do you expect? I'm the Movie Moron.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
Don't call me stupid.
Oh, right! To call you stupid would be an insult to stupid people! I've known sheep that could outwit you.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like, your opinion, man.
Man, you are one pathetic loser. No offense. No, none taken.